Salute, ladies. Today's lesson is a pretty long one, so we have to sort of keep a very brisk pace during this video. We are going to do lesson 27 in the Latin for Americans textbook, and this is the present passive system for all conjugations. Now, what do I mean by present passive system? I mean all three tenses that use the present stem to form, okay? So that would be the present, the imperfect, and the future. So today we're gonna learn the present, the imperfect, and the future passive indicative, as well as the present passive infinitive. Okay. Now, the first thing we need to discuss is what is the difference between an active verb and a passive verb. Okay. So when it comes to voice, we have two options. We have active and passive, and they're gonna function in different ways. Okay. An active verb is a verb where the subject of the verb is doing the action of the verb, okay? Whereas for a passive verb, the subject of the passive verb is having the action of the verb done to it, okay? It's the difference between saying I love, so the action of the verb is loving, and I am the subject, and therefore I am doing it, therefore it's active, I love, as opposed to I am loved. The action is loving, but I'm not the one doing it. The subject is not the one doing it. It's the one receiving the action of the verb. So I am loved. Just like with active verbs, the first and second conjugations form the present and the future passive in a slightly different, in a different way than the third conjugation. And the third conjugation forms in a slightly different way from the third IO and the fourth. Okay, so you have to learn how to form the passive voice for in the present, imperfect, and future passive. One way for the first, second conjugations, a different way for third conjugation, and a slightly different way for third IO, fourth. We're going to start with first, second conjugations, and then we'll come back and do another one of these sort of introductory slides for the third IO, and fourth. To form the passive for the first, second conjugation verbs in the present, imperfect, and future indicative, you need to get your present stem, and then you need to add the passive endings to them, okay? So the present passive endings, the imperfect passive endings, and the future passive endings, okay? To form the present passive infinitive for the first two conjugations, you replace the final E in the second principal part with an I, a long I, okay? All right, so let me show you in chart form how we're going to do this. So this is how you conjugate first, second conjugation verbs in the present passive system. We're going to do the present passive indicative first. Notice that the first person singular present passive indicative is the only form where you're going to use the first principal part instead of the present stem. That's also true, by the way, in the present active indicative. The difference with the passive is that you're going to add an R to the end of the first principal part, okay? The rest of the present passive is going to use the present stem plus the passive endings, and those are ris, ter, mer, mini, inter, okay? And then our present passive infinitive, second principal part, you remove the final E, and then you add a long I. For imperfect and future passive, sorry, I did a little reconfiguring. You need your present stem, and then you need the imperfect passive endings, bar, baris, bator, bamor, bamini, bantor. And then for the future passive, present stem plus the future passive indicative endings, bor, baris, bitor, bimor, bimini, buntor. Okay? All right, let's look at how we use these, this pattern to conjugate a real first conjugation verb, laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatum. Our present stem, which you get from removing the RE from the second principal part, is lauda, and then we just add the ending. So remember, first principal part plus R, so laudo plus R is laudor, I am praised. Laudaris, go after that, we need our present stem for the second, third, for second, third plural. Laudator, laudamor, laudamini, laudantor. Now, ladies, I've noticed that a few of you guys have stopped writing down all of the example verbs. Don't do that. You must write them down. This is how you get the practice of not just learning how to form these verbs sort of in theory, but how to do them actually in practice, okay? Notice that for our present passive infinitive, we have the second principal part, laudare, but we took off that final E and replaced it with an I. So now we have the present passive infinitive, to be praised. Okay? Now, imperfect passive indicative, we have our present stem, lauda, and then our endings, laudabar, laudabaris, laudabator, laudabamor, laudabamini, laudabantor. Okay? When you translate the imperfect passive, you have to remember it's still imperfect. So you still have to get that continuous past action, that incomplete past action in there. So you translate the imperfect passive as I was being praised. Okay, not just I was praised. That's going to be perfect passive. It has to be I was being praised, you were being praised, he or she or it was being praised, etc., etc. Okay? Future passive, again, present stem plus the future passive ending. So laudabor, laudabaris, laudabitor, laudabimor, laudabimini, laudabuntor. Okay? And again, future has to be future in addition to passive. So I will be praised, you will be praised, he, she, or it will be praised, etc., etc. This exact same pattern repeats for the second conjugation. So look at our second conjugation verb, video, videre, vidi, visum. Okay. Our present stem, you take the re off the second principal part, is vide. So again, how do you form the first person singular present passive indicative? You need your first principal part, video, and then you add the r. So videor, I am seen. And then after that, you need your present stem, vide, plus your endings, so videris, videtor, videmor, videmini, videnter. Okay? So I am seen, you are seen, etc. Present passive infinitive, again, you replace that final E with a long I, videre, to be seen. Imperfect, videbar, videbaris, videbator, so I was being seen, you were being seen, he, she, or it was being seen. Videbamor, videbamini, videbantor, we were being seen, y'all were being seen, they were being seen, etc. Future passive, videbor, I will be seen. Videbaris, videbitor, videbimor, videbimini, videbuntor. Okay, so that's the first two conjugations. When we have to conjugate the third IO, or fourth in present passive system, we're going to have to follow slightly different patterns, right? Just like with the active. So, with the present active system, the present passive relies on a change of a vowel to distinguish between the present passive and the future passive for third IO, and fourth, okay? So just as you never use bo, bis, bit for the future active, you never use bor, baris, bitor for the future passive for third IOs, and fourths, okay? Now this is an important thing, and I'll emphasize this as we go through, but the only difference between the second person singular present passive indicative and the second person singular future passive indicative for the third conjugation is a macron. So that's going to be a very important macron that you guys must identify and you must have in all your charts. When it comes to passives, we come to two ways in which the third IO and the fourth are going to be a little bit different from each other. The first one is in the second person singular present passive indicative, and the other one is the present passive infinitive, as I'll show you. Speaking of the present passive infinitive, third and third IO form the present passive infinitive different from the first, second, and fourth, okay? For the third and third IO verbs, you remove the entire ERE from the second principal part and replace it with an I in order to go from active infinitive to passive infinitive, okay? So that's going to look pretty weird, and I'll point it out to you in a couple of slides. Fourth conjugation actually forms its passive infinitive the same way as the first and the second. You remove the final E and replace it with an I. So, okay, let's look at the chart so we can maybe like conceptualize how these are going to work. Present passive infinitive, you need the first principal part, as always, plus an R, but then you need the present stem. Now remember, for third IOs, and fourths, you get the present stem by removing the entire ERE or IRE from the second principal part. So you need to supply the vowel. In the present passive indicative, the second person singular vowel is a short E, and it must be short, okay, plus the passive ending. And then for the rest of them, it's what you expect. Third singular, first and second plural, you have an I supplied as the vowel, and then third person plural, a U. Okay, but still these exact same endings are ristor, mur, mini, intor, as we have for the first and second conjugations. Yay. For the second principal part, you have to remove the entire ERE, or present passive infinitive, entire ERE from the second principal part and replace it with an I. Okay, imperfect passive indicative, again, we have our present stem, and then we need to supply the E, right? And then our imperfect endings, bar, baris, bator, bamor, bomini, bantor. And then for the future passive, again, never use bor, baris, bitor for future passive, okay? You need your present stem, and then we're going to change our vowel to show that we're in the future passive. Works the exact same way in the future active. So this isn't something that that should be surprising you guys, okay? For the first person singular, it's an A plus an R, and then after that it's an E plus those exact passive endings that you would expect. Ris, ter, mur, mini, and ter. Okay, so looking at our paradigm verb for the third conjugation, ago, agere, agi, actum, we get our present stem from removing the entire ERE from the second principal part, so that gives us a present stem of ag. For our first person singular present passive indicative, we need ago plus the R, so agor, I am driven. But then afterwards we need our present stem ag, okay, and then we have to add our vowels and our endings. So ageris, agitor, agimor, agimini, agunter, okay? We remove the entire ERE from the second principal part and replace it with an I, so the present passive infinitive is agi, to be driven. Now, look at this second person singular present passive indicative. AG, short E, RIS. The only difference between that and the future passive indicative second person singular is that macron, ageris, okay? We have our present stem, we add our vowel, A, long E, short E, long E, short E, and then our endings are ris, ter, mur, mini, inter. So the only difference between the second person singular present passive indicative and future passive indicative is that macron. So that's a very important macron. You must always have that macron, and you must always be paying attention to that macron to know whether it is present passive or future passive. So agar, I will be driven, ageris, you will be driven, agetur, he, she, it will be driven, etc. Just to skip back for a second, the imperfect passive indicative is our present stem plus E, long E, plus bar, baris, bator. So agebar, agebaris, agebator, agebamor, agebamini, agebantor. All right, third IO pretty much works the same way, except for with the I, for the most part. Present passive indicative is first principal part plus the R. Second person singular is present stem plus the E plus the ris. Now you would expect this to be an I, but it's not. It's an E. That's one of those weird little things that happens here in the passive. But then after that, we switch to the I, just as you would expect, plus the IU in the third person plural, okay? Like the third conjugation, third IOs remove the entire ERE and replace it with an I, okay? Nothing surprising here. Third IOs, you need your present stem plus IE plus the imperfect passive endings. Future passive endings, you need the present stem plus I plus A plus R, I plus E plus ris, I plus E plus ter, so on and so forth. Our paradigm verb is capio, capere, capi, captum. So our present stem is cap. We have our first principal part, capior, caperis, capitor, capimor, capimini, capiuntor. And again, this is weird because we expect an I here, but it is actually an E. Present passive infinitive, copy, to be taken. And then copiebar, copiebaris, copiebator, I was being taken, you were being taken, so on and so forth. And then in the future, copiar, copieris, copietur, copiemor, copiemini, copiuntor. Now, The fourth conjugation is practically the exact same thing. The only difference is that it has a long I in its second person singular present passive indicative, and it forms its present passive infinitive by replacing the final E with an I. Okay, I'm going to quickly scroll through these before the video runs out, and I would like for you to write them down, please.